Hi everyone, my name is Brian. I am the Career Pathways Counselor for KIPP Forward here in KIPP SoCal. And today we're getting started with apprenticeships, what they are, what you can do, how you can pursue them, and some helpful tips along the way that I hope you'll be able to practice as you pursue your own goals. So our agenda is to go over and define what apprenticeships are, to go over some of the expectations when you take on an apprenticeship, and to go over the minimum requirements that are required for apprenticeships. And finally, we'll cover how to get started and some additional resources you might find helpful in your journey. What are apprenticeships? So when we think about apprenticeships, we are talking really about work development opportunities where you can obtain paid work and classroom instruction. And typically you get a credential or you get a certificate that says you've completed this training, and then you can actually take that anywhere in the region where that credential is recognized. So in a lot of ways, it echoes some of the college aspect, but these tend to be a lot shorter and they're very job specific, right? So depending on the trade that you're doing, you will be required to go through a certain amount of training time, both in practice and in a sort of classroom environment, if you will, before they'll promote you to an independent contractor um, for full eligible for full employment. So a very important distinction is that these are typically offered through a registered program or directly by a local labor union. So they might be offered at community colleges, at adult centers in your local community, as well as some larger chapters of bigger labor unions. For example, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers here in Los Angeles County is one chapter of electrical worker unions that support apprenticeship work training programs, right? And so those are split up, right, into different regions. So there's one in Anaheim, there's one in Commerce that covers a lot of the LA area, and there's one in the Valley, right, in the San Fernando Valley. So depending on where you are, you might go to one of these, whatever's closest to you, whatever's more convenient, and then register there. They tend to offer, all of these, both the labor unions, the adult education programs, and the career technical education programs, as well as two-year and colleges and universities. They tend to offer free training for you if you commit to supporting the labor union after your training is complete, right? So that's the catch. I think when it comes to apprenticeships, you're making that commitment, and that commitment may mean that you're there for about, anywhere from 2 to 3 years to 5 years, depending on what type of apprenticeship you choose. So let's take a look at some other important factors. So what can you expect from an apprenticeship? The first thing to know, and I've mentioned this word before, it's that a union, right? All of these are typically through unions. There are other places you can get apprenticeships at, but the most benefits come from union work. A union is an organization of workers who together, because there's so many people working and organizing together, they give you access to jobs and to living wages. If the group doesn't feel that they are getting paid, then you can organize yourselves and maybe even cause a strike to make sure you're getting paid what is appropriate for the level of work that you're doing. And particularly, they do this because we want to make sure that the people who are doing these critical jobs in our society are getting paid right and they're getting trained right, because we don't want anything bad to happen. For example, to our plumbing, right? Or to our wiring in a house, right? Which can cause a lot of dangers if it's not done properly. So one of the benefits as a cause of that is that as you're going into these programs, you're getting hands-on training. You're learning how to do it physically, oftentimes at an actual job site, learning all those safety requirements while also getting paid to do that, right? And so that's unique typically to apprenticeships via unions, but you may find that situation elsewhere, or once you've completed a particular number of hours, you might be able to enter that union and do that same type of structure, right? but it's very defined. They have certain amount of hours. You complete those hours, etc. You'll be a full-fledged member of your labor sector. The next benefit is that you start your day early and then you go to training after work, right? So there's an education portion that I think we want to make sure you know about. You may start your day at 7 o'clock. You may need to be on site at 7 o'clock, right? And then you'll do your full days of work. You'll come back to the work training center, right, where you originally applied for an apprenticeship, and you will receive an education, a training program, a curriculum in particular that has to do with the work that you're doing. None of this is extra. It's all related to what you're doing. It's all important, and it's all going to help you advance through your hours, which brings us to our last point, right? When you have access to employment immediately as soon as you're approved to be a part of the apprenticeship via union. If you do it through other means, you might have to take some classes first and then have access to the union work, right? But if you're hired directly through the apprentice, you can actually get paid. You're gonna get paid more for the more hours you accumulate on the job, right? So if you're done with 1,000 hours, then you're going to get a pay bump. And if you're done with 2,000 hours, another pay bump, etc. All the way until you complete whatever the amount of required hours is, right? So these are the three general benefits. And now we get to the really fun part. What are the minimum requirements? If you're eager to start your role in a particular trade, um, maybe HVAC, maybe welding, maybe plumbing, as we mentioned before. These all have different requirements, but in general, you need to have the following 5 items. Number one, you got to be 18 years or older. They don't take younger people. However, there are pre-apprenticeship programs that can prepare you to become an apprentice, which will prepare you to become a full-fledged journeyman, a full member who knows all their training for that particular career path, right? So, so that's an important distinction, right? But what can you do before you reach 18? You can have a high school diploma or GED, and I highly suggest that you put some effort and practice into learning your math and English and even some of the physics skills that you need to know to not just pass the course, but as you'll see in number 4, to take an exam. Certainly don't skip out or think that I don't need this anymore. Everybody requires a basic education, and this is no exception. Number 3, people are really, here in Los Angeles in particular, in California, we have a lot of folks who are excited to get their driver's license, but for the requirements for an apprenticeship, typically they require you to have one already by the time you apply. And if you don't see that included in the application, they'll ask it sometime later on. So don't think that you've escaped that process, right? In particular, you must have at least 1 month of driver's record experience for you to be eligible to become an apprentice. And the reason they do this is because they want to make sure that you can get there on time. If you cannot get there to this job site on time, then because you don't have transportation, then will be really difficult for you to learn the skill set, right? They can't rely on you on a job. So this is why it's important to, even before you're 18, if you can learn how to drive, you don't need to have a car yet, but you should certainly have a driver's license as soon as possible, right? And that will help you get those apprenticeships sooner. Number 4 is, being able to lift and carry 30 to 50 pounds is typically uh, a lot of the apprenticeship work that we're talking about here is labor intensive. And so it's important that you consider your ability to carry those around those pounds, right? It's not going to be every day, but even when you look at the apprenticeship requirements, it'll tell you it might be crawling in small spaces. It might be smelly. It might be tight. It might be too hot, it might be too cold, right? Rain or shine, typically folks in these professions have to continue their work, right? Because they're so vital to what we do as a society. the power goes out, somebody has to go out and fix it, right? So these are all like general requirements. You'll find specific, details about this for every field, as you fill out the application. Number 5, the reason I emphasize the high school, again, diploma and GED is because you need to pass a math, an English, and what we call a mechanics exam, and then later also pass an interview, right? And so in the application process, it's much like applying to any other job. They'll ask you about some work experience. They'll ask you why you want to do this. But in addition, there are at least, math requirements that you need to do, certain English requirements that you need to understand, and then certain mechanics, right? So for math, you need at least Algebra 2. And it's helpful if you know more because that makes some of the mechanics stuff easier. English, of course, basic English is helpful, but if you can explain yourself and elaborate on some of your ideas and passions, all the better, because it's going to help you on the interview. And the mechanics, I've mentioned this word before, but it really just means that you need to know how mechanical objects work and operate. And that's not necessarily something that we teach in a regular K-12 curriculum. It is more about logic and logic and mechanics, right? Physics, understanding how pulleys work and gears and how they turn, and water spigots, etc., right? So there's a lot of little details that I think would be best if you practice with some of the preparation that they have. They do have practice guides, they have that covered. You can ask for them for resources, but for the math and English, I would suggest you go to Khan Academy, right? So, and of course, we have our own resources here at KIPP where you can do a interview with us and we can prepare you for some of the things that you might be expecting. It is also, if you choose to take on a pre-apprenticeship program, meaning that before you turn 18, you do one of these programs to prepare, they will also prepare you for those, for that number 5, right? So you're really knowledgeable about where you're entering as a new inductee to the field. Which careers have an apprenticeship, right? You will see here a couple of samples: electricians, operating engineers, machinists, plumbers, carpenters on the bottom right, and welders, right? They all typically require some training beforehand. The length of training may take shorter, it might be 6 months, it might be a year, or it might be up to 5 years, depending on what you choose, right? There's a lot of variety, there's a lot of different unions. And then all of the availability also depends on what area you're at, right? So don't think that this is the full list. One of the websites at the end, you'll see it's called calapprenticeship.org. It looks a little wonky because it's old, but it's a really reliable site that allows you to see some of the, not just what the role is, but what is typically done in those roles and where you can get training for those roles as well, right? And so keep in mind that these have changing requirements. They even have changing pay, right? Every 3 months, they tend to update the entry level pay. So what we've seen is that they go higher over time. And so you're really dealing with a lot of folks who maybe like yourself want to enter the field, are looking for that free training opportunity, are not really into going into a liberal arts or more general education program. They know what they want to do and they know that this will get them there, and will also be able to provide a steady wage for them to live, right? And so keep that, those are the folks that you're competing with. There's a lot of individuals interested in these fields. Don't take it for granted that that this is easier or harder than going to community college or college, right? This is not the case about comparing things, but this is a very competitive field to enter. There's a lot of follow through, right? A lot of requirements, which I'll give you some tips in a bit as well. So, how do I get started? What are those tips, right? First of all, remember that I'm here in particular, but the entire KIPP Forward team is here to support you and figure some of these requirements out. But number 1 is, as I've mentioned, you've probably heard me say, is to find a pre-apprenticeship program or a CTE program. Those are typically where employment programs are offered. They're in particular, pre-apprenticeship programs, as the name implies, is what you do before you take on an apprenticeship, right? And so it really allows you to focus in on the requirements to have verbal understanding of what you're expected to do in the job role, and so you're not lost, right? You know what you're getting into, you know what you're signing up, you know how long it's going to take, you know how much you're going to get paid, and what you need to do to make sure that you get that role. And so when you are working with these programs, even in a CTE program offered through an adult education site or through a 2-year community college, they're all going to ask you about your motivation. They're all going to present you some options. Some of these might be paid, some of them might not be paid, some of them might be minimum wage, others might be above that, right? The only ones that are for sure are through the union, right? And so that's another way you can do that. But if you're in the in-between stage of finding or figuring out what you want, both of these are great options. They're easy access to get started on your career path. Number two is really to make a plan, right? As I've mentioned before, uh, there's a lot of details that you can't get started until maybe you're 18, but try to do as much of the research as you can up to that point, right? Up to the point you can start working on some of the bigger items, right? Because that's going to facilitate you entering the field so much sooner than maybe some of your peers who didn't do those requirements. Why do you want to do this role? And how are you going to get there are always great questions, as is what do I need to do to succeed in this field, right? There's a lot of people who apply, but for example, not many people follow through. So when sometimes, one of the conversations I had with the plumbing union here in LA, they were like, hey, we have a list of people that we call for jobs that are available once they sign up for their training, or if they want to do the training, once they fill out the application and they don't actually pick up the phone, right? And so are you going to be available when they call you and they need you to show up the next day for work? Are you going to be available at 6 o'clock in the morning when work is typically done for that field, right? Um, those are all like important questions to ask now that will support you in understanding and being more competitive because you can say yes confidently to those requirements. Again, each field will have slightly different requirements on it, but those five that I mentioned before are the fundamentals. Be patient with yourself is really number three, because some of these fields, it just takes about a month to, from finishing the application to hearing back from them to see if there's a spot, right? So the whole process takes about a month for you to go take the test, interview, etc. And other times it takes 3 months, it takes 6 months, it takes a year, right? If you go through community college, yeah, you might be doing the program sooner, but you're perhaps not getting paid. So there are trade-offs, right? If you do it through a union, you'll get paid, but it might take you longer to get into the program. Especially when you consider that, there are requirements for math and English and the examinations as well as the interviews, right? These are competitive programs. Don't take it for granted. They are available year round typically, but a lot of the availability also depends on where you live and how soon you can fill out the application and complete the other requirements to turn in. If you miss one of the paperworks, then you have to start over. And we had that happen before, so I want to make sure I warn you to have everything in hand by the time you turn everything in. Be patient with yourself. You can do this, but it requires careful planning, commitment, and understanding what you're signing up for. So, some additional resources as we wrap up, right? Use these to really understand and expand your search for your pathway, right? So the first one is the government's website, the federal government's website for opportunities. It is apprenticeships.org. Uh, I have found some apprenticeships in culinary arts, for example, in manufacturing, etc., right? Like this is a big website and it covers the entirety of the US. So some of them might, if you're planning on moving away, then it might be a good role for you. Others are less structured programs that don't pay, right? So don't always keep it in mind, but be mindful that these are opportunities for training largely, and they don't always pay on this website at least, right? So great source nonetheless to give you a sense of what's out there and what fields require, even technology, right? We didn't go over this, but computers, IT programmers, specialists, right? Customer support, all of those might fall under apprenticeships as well. SD Workforce Partnership is a great resource down in the San Diego area. They have a wide variety of programs, and they have one in particular for construction called the Construction Jumpstart program. And they've done it a couple of times now. They've had several successes with folks at all ages. So if you don't have to be young to enter these programs, you could be 26. If you have a change in mind or change in career, you can go back into that and take advantage of that program. But it is competitive. It does prepare you really well, and people come out really happy with that program, right? So I think it's worth it. Definitely keep in mind that they recruit about twice or three times a year. So that's the only downside, right? You have to catch them at the right time. Cal Apprenticeship is the website that I was sharing with you all earlier that lists all the career type apprenticeships for California and the requirements and where to get training. They're all listed up and down that sheet. And it's also a great resource to just read as a fundamentally, right, what kind of career you are going to get into, right? So great resource. Don't get worried that this is all it looks like an old website. It is a really old website, but all the information is just kept new, right? So the fourth option here is LAUSD education, right? And this varies, right? You can always look at your local school district for adult education programs, and those will also carry some nursing programs, some other short-term career engagement opportunities that if they don't pay you while you're training, then you certainly will spend less time training and then more time being able to go immediately into the workforce, right? And earning more than the average in a lot of cases, right? So, but they also are an alternative source for apprenticeship programs in the labor unions that can get you prepared to enter that workforce and get paid, right? So, really great resource. They have several employment occupation centers and employment centers um, and there are similar programs even in San Diego. I think it's mostly concentrated at the high school level, so you might look into that. But there's also like the San Diego College of Continuing Education, which also supports career technical education programs. We will have a presentation on that soon, so keep your eyes out for that. And of course, lastly, is your local union, right? Your local union is probably the greatest place to start for apprenticeship program. So if you type the field that you want plus union, if you add union, so electrical union, apprenticeship on Google, on your search engine, at the library, right, you will find some of the local area unions because they've been here for a long time, right? So they have a lot of connections, they're well established. You just got to make sure that you connect with someone there, right? And we can help, facilitate that. That's part of our role here at KIPP to support you in making those connections and having understanding. They also tend to be at job role sites, right? So if you have a job fair, they'll be there, and you can ask them all the questions you want before you even sign up, right? Again, all the requirements apply as before. You should be 18. They won't take you if you're younger. I've tried asking doesn't work that way. So really, they want you to make that full commitment and be 18 and ready to do that. Finally, this is our last slide. So congratulations for making it this far. I just wanted to share my contact information, email, phone number. You can text me, call me. I'm generally available and I can get back to you if I'm not. But really, I want to be able to support you in the entirety of the process, right? It's important. It's not as easy as like college. It isn't as like planned out, is what I find a lot of ways. So a lot of the responsibility for searching for these resources falls on you, but not entirely. We are here to support you as a team, as KIPP SoCal, to engage with you and to really plan out your next steps all the way through so that you can have a successful transition into your apprenticeship programs, right? These are here to help you explore, to help you better solidify what you want to do with your future, no matter what the age. So thank you again for your time, and I hope to hear from you soon. Bye bye.